So LinkedIn is one way that we can convey our personal brand. And remember, just like if you think about in a grocery aisle, right? The cereal boxes are always going to be there. They're there. Like General Mills is not going to stay there and kind of sell you. Kellogg's is not going to stay there. But the boxes are always there. So when you walk by it, you know what it stands for. Well, what about you, right? What about for personal branding for individuals? What needs to stand in the aisle when we're not there, right? And LinkedIn is a great way, a great tool to do that. It's a great selling tool to kind of represent us when we're not there. I was curious to know what was LinkedIn's personal brand, right? Because as much as people have personal brands, so do corporations. And this is what they said. LinkedIn enables professionals to build and manage their identities, create and leverage their professional networks, and gain the knowledge they need to be more successful in their careers across multiple screens and devices. Now think about the point about anchoring, differentiating, and what do you want people to know you for, right? Those three things about why personal brands are important. They're very focused on what it is that they're able to do. First thing they do is they enable, right? So it's a tool for you to use, right? And what do you use it for? Well, to manage your identity. Now, identity is, again, who you're known for, right? So it's a bit of a value proposition conversation there as well. And then using that for professional networking and knowledge kind of transfer is what they do. Essentially, what LinkedIn's personal brand is, they empower you to share your personal brand, right? So it's pretty interesting that they would put that statement there. So leveraging LinkedIn's key features, there's a couple of things that I wanted to focus today on, very tactical elements of LinkedIn that we can use to convey our personal brand. So here are a number of them, right? So pictures and banners, taglines and headlines, these are all sections of LinkedIn now. The open to indicator about, that you're looking for employment or a role in these specific areas. The about, the experience section, education, skills and endorsements, how you customize your URL, so your web address and your public profile, and visibility around there, and then also network visibility and LinkedIn activity visibility. So we'll go through each one of these. And we don't have time to go into detail, but we'll kind of talk through about how do you use each one of these sections to convey your personal brand. The first thing is around pictures and banners. And I often talk about the fact that, first impressions are extremely important, and a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So banners in particular are very important because they convey immediate to the audience a perception of that person. Their personal brand comes right out. So look at the gentleman on the left, right? When you look at their banner, what do you think their personal brand is, right? What do you think they want you to know them for, right? Well, I look at this and I think probably a very technical person, right? Probably a very seasoned experience. I mean, look at how many qualifications they put even in their banner about their tenure and what they've done, etc. So probably someone who's really taken a lot of technical process driven look at, technology, which is what this role is, right? A technology executive. If you look at the person on the right, their banner conveys more of perhaps creativity, perhaps innovation, because they've got a cloud there, right? So the perception that you have about that person, even though they're both technology executives, is quite different. And again, what is it that you want to convey from a personal branding perspective? You have to think about what the image looks like for yourself. Some questions around sort of the headlines, we can address that if that's an important question to you, but please drop that in the Q&A if you'd like to talk about that. Taglines and headlines. So you don't want to have this to be too heavy, right? But at the same time, you want the headlines to be indicative enough and informative about what specific skills or capabilities do you have. Again, this goes back to that quadrant, right? What do you want to be known for? And you want them to be informative, value communicating, and SEO, which is search engine optimization driven headlines. And that speaks to the applicant tracking system, the keywords. We often talk about that, right? In our resumes and LinkedIn. Do recruiters and committees, do they look for, keywords? And absolutely they do, right? They need to do that even as a first kind of a filter per se. So examples would be, a default might be Senior VP of Marketing, Personal Care Products line. You might want to elaborate that a little bit. I'm not saying that the optimized version is what you should go for, but something like this would probably be a little more compelling, right? Senior Vice President of Marketing, Consumer Products, and then you indicate some of the things that you've done: omnichannel strategy, business development. You might talk about a metric there, throw in a metric, 45% growth delivered, right? And that in that headline, first of all, it's keyword search optimized. But then secondly, as I read it, it's informative about who you are, what you want me to take away from your description about yourself. Okay. And then open to, so finding a new job. This is interesting. This is a relatively newer addition to LinkedIn, not extremely new, but it's been around for about a year and a half or so. There's variations of this, for example, right? People often ask about, should I put the open to work green sign around our circles? I mean, that's a different conversation, but this is kind of part and parcel to that. But there is a section in LinkedIn where you can click on, which is a settings section, where it allows you to kind of choose, job titles that you're aiming for, right? So you want to pick 5 of them when you open this up and be able to list that out, because this is what's visible to recruiters. Workplaces, locations, there's preferences around where you might want to be working, right? So cities, even down to cities and states and countries, etc. Start dates, LinkedIn allows you to put that down there if it's an immediate start date, or if you have a 6-month sort of sabbatical and then you want to start 6 months from now, you can put that down as well. The kinds of jobs that you want, you can also indicate that as well when you have the open to section there. And on the right side, you can see the sort of the visual kind of drop downs. And again, how to get there, we can navigate you through that. Our coaches actually help you optimize that as well, but drop a note if you'd like us to follow up with that. And then who sees that you're open, right? And this is a critical one on the furthest right there, is that you can indicate that you only want certain people to see that you're open for a role. And that means just recruiters only. It might be your full network. It might be maybe nobody for now. If you're sort of in a position of kind of repositioning yourself or kind of revamping your career management and journey. The About section is by far the most important, I would say, because I know the algorithm of LinkedIn is a bit of a mystery, and people will often say, well, where should I put things where, and to optimize that so people will read it the most and kind of it pops to the top. The About section by far is going to be one of the most important parts, because it really is essentially, it's your resume plus your personal brand plus everything put together in a couple of paragraphs, right? And remember, LinkedIn is your 24/7 personal brand advocate. So if I'm looking for you, John Smith or Jane Smith, and I'm Googling you up, and the first thing that comes up is your LinkedIn profile, and I click on that and it opens it up, the About section tells me a lot about you, even when you're not there, right? So there's several kind of cardinal rules that I try to follow. One is a brand versus value add. So you want to be able to kind of show the reader what value you would indicate for them, you would add to them if they were to hire you on. And you kind of do this organically, right? Because you kind of describe the achievements that you've had, but really more from a descriptive perspective of, here's the context that I led, here's some of the information about the company, but here's also the impact that I had when I was there, and as I go forward as well. You want a short career story. So it doesn't go into great detail about, for the past 10 years, you've worked at these places, but a career story is really about a win story. It's about where, perhaps you have a theme in your career where you've constantly gone into companies and helped them to restructure, right? You may have been sort of an interim role CEO sort of multiple times in your career, but the career story gets people involved and engaged with what your journey is like and kind of the challenges that you've had. And it might resonate with what they're looking for as well. They might be going through the same situation and need someone with skills like yourself to join them, right? So a short career story is important. Visually distinct section for highlighted skills or achievements. So if you look at the bottom part of that example there, we've used bullet points to kind of highlight some of the areas of expertise. Now, there's some debate and discussion about where you put your skills. I just recently worked with a client who was asking, should I put the skills under the skills section of LinkedIn, which makes sense. And I said, yes, you should. But I said, because the applicant tracking system and keyword search does search about section quite a bit, you also want to include your skills in that section as well, if you can, without crowding things. Third person versus first person. Again, I like to use LinkedIn to humanize my clients, meaning that a resume really tells the technical story about this person and their achievement. LinkedIn profile tells a more personal story, right? It doesn't negate the fact that you do talk about the achievements, but in the context of that, you want to describe what were some of the challenges that I faced, right? How did I go about solving them? What was the outcome? is it an ongoing process? But here's what I've learned. Here's what I can contribute to an organization if you hired me on as a C-suite, right? So first person to me is quite valuable in that, because you have a chance to speak, right, for yourself in personal branding language. And then resume summary versus conversation starter. You might want to think about this as you're writing your about section about, is this going to be just an expanded executive summary, right, at the beginning of your resume? Or is it going to be something that people will read and say, hey, I'm interested in talking to John or Jane Smith about that particular thing they mentioned. And what did they mean when they said, they were able to optimize or, make things more efficient, etc. So the about section is very important. And the experience section obviously is critical, right? This is your resume in the form of LinkedIn. It is not a cut and paste. Please do not do that. That is a mistake that a lot of people make. It actually becomes very cluttered and it's very difficult to read. People also tend to look at LinkedIn in chunks of progression. So LinkedIn makes it very easy for a recruiter or a committee to look at progression of each of the roles, just because of the way they lay out their logos, right? They lay out their job titles, the way that they kind of highlight, you have to kind of click more of. And what you want to do is be able to have more detail as you get closer to your tenure. Right now, as you're more senior and your very first role out of college, you don't want to blow that up with like 5 different bullet points, right? You want to show some indication of achievement, but it has to make sense of the whole context of your career journey. But beware of missing company logos. You want to make sure that you fill everything in as much as possible. If you are a startup, there's a very easy way to kind of make your own logo and kind of add that back in. And that's another discussion for another topic there, but you can add your own logos, but make sure if you have worked for a brand that is known that you add their logos in there. High-level info on scope, functions, and accountabilities. Again, keep it at sort of, not very detailed out, but just enough for people to understand the taste of your personal brand. Highlights with too many numbers and financials. You want to be careful that you're not inundating people with, numbers and metrics and percentages, dollars, and all of that. It just becomes very cluttered with, well, I want to know about you, right? I want to know about your personal brand. I don't want to know exactly about what you achieved yet, but I want to know what it's like to work with you. Special emphasis on above the fold. So what I mean by this is, in advertising, if you are in advertising, there's a lot of premium that's placed on anything that's above the fold, right? Before you have to scroll down and see what's below that. So that's why headlines are called headlines. You want to make sure that whatever is the first and second bullet points before people have to click on more, right, is the key kind of anchors for what people, you want people to see, right? So you want to be very clear about your above the fold content there. Exercise caution, don't divulge confidential information. Absolutely, right? So this is one of the concerns that people will always say. Some of my clients will say, I've never used LinkedIn. I will never use LinkedIn because I don't want anybody to know that I'm looking for work, or I don't want anybody to know the clients that I work with. And, or if you're a very specialized industry, you don't want to do that. That's no problem at all. But if you do use LinkedIn, just be careful that the information that you're divulging is not going to come back to bite you. Being careful not to paint your negative picture of your, this is a problem that sometimes we all kind of face, right? Coming out of a transitional role, I've experienced a lot is looking at resumes where the person who's been outplaced, right? You've been transitioned out, is very bitter. And what happens is when they try to rewrite their resume, their bitterness comes out in how they describe the situation of work and even how they solve the problem, right? So they might say something like, you really tried to project a project management plan, despite the fact that, senior leadership team was incompetent, right? You don't want to use that kind of language. Absolutely not. So no one likes a negative person, right? You need to find a way to post it in a positive light and couch it that way. And there are many different ways that we can do that as well. All right, so let's keep going. Education, certificates, additional information. This is pretty self-explanatory. Logos are important, certifications. You want to include what is relevant. Quite frankly, in LinkedIn, you can put everything on there. That's no problem at all. What this really more pertains to is, as a personal brand, you want to make sure that your certificates on your resume, for example, are relevant to what you're applying for, right? So an accounting designation is important if you're applying for a financial job. Organizations and volunteers, include that, of course, causes that are important to you. Remember, LinkedIn is also a conversation starter, right? So there's always going to be a potential that what you put in there as a volunteer interest might resonate with the person who's reading your profile. And so earlier days in our career, we may have had sort of a hobbies and interests section, right, in our resume at the very end. And the reason why we put that in there is that this is called an anchor. These are hooks. And there's a hook section. So what you do is you use that as a means for, let's say there's 100 resumes that in your earlier days, perhaps as a manager, that recruiters would look at and say, well, you know what, there's a batch here that are sort of maybes. They're pretty good, but I'm not quite sure that they're there for an interview. But what they do is they start skimming through the resumes, and the anchor points are actually what they end up looking at. It's like, oh, this person is interested in golfing. Well, they've got sort of a par score of this, that, and the other. And that resume becomes a little bit higher in the list. And that's just the psychology of recruitment, which, the coaches on our team also talk a lot about.